In this video, I'm going to help you find the best race or faction for you in Warhammer 40k. To keep up to date with everything at Knights at the Game Table, all you have to do is click subscribe and then hit that tiny little notification button next to it, so every time we upload a new video, YouTube will be sure to let you know. So in Warhammer 40k, there are many different factions, and people always ask which is the best race or faction to choose. Now at the end of this video, I'm going to let you know which race I personally believe is probably the best fit for that particular question. However, throughout the video, I'm going to break down the pros and cons of each of the different factions to help you choose which is the best race for you. Now, the first one are the Space Marines. If you like big, badass Marines in tough armor, then this is the faction for you. The pros of the Space Marines is they are Games Workshop's favorites, so you're always going to be the first to get anything new. For example, the Primaris Marines that only came out last year in 2017, they were a complete miniature overhaul, and of course they went to the Space Marines. They were the first ones to get their full codex in 8th edition, and the really good thing about the Space Marines is they're very easy for beginners to play, but they can be rewarding for experts as well, as there's a lot of nuances that can make a difference in the gameplay. They can be optimized to focus on many specific elements. For example, you can do a mass jump pack army, or you can focus on close combat, or you can even have a gun line when you stay back and shoot. And whenever you do this, you don't really sacrifice any viability in the gameplay of the Space Marines. As a con, however, because they are one of the most popular armies by far, almost everybody has a plan for killing you, taking you out, and taking on your Space Marines. So everyone is going to know how to handle you. Now, moving on, we have the Blood Angels, which are a sub-faction of the Space Marines. And if you like the idea of Space Marine vampire angels that like close combat, then this is going to be the faction for you. The pros about the Blood Angels is that everything in the Blood Angel army is designed for getting in close and destroying the army of your opponent in close combat. They've got jump packs, they've got the ability to fight multiple times, they get bonuses to their strength. However, the cons is that this army is meant for quick and total annihilation of your opponents. If you can't accomplish that in a couple of turns, then the Blood Angels are going to get overwhelmed pretty easily later on in the rounds, especially if you fail to get the charge. Now, another Space Marine faction you might want to look at are the Dark Angels. And if you like futuristic space knights that have secret meetings about things that they really shouldn't be talking about, then the Dark Angels are the faction for you. They were actually the very first Space Marine faction, and one of the things that's great about them is they have all of the typical equipment of a regular Space Marine, but lots of different overlapping bubbles that enable them to buff their units and debuff their enemy. So this gives you a lot of advantages, especially when it comes to dice rolls. If somebody gets bad luck in your dice rolls, then the Dark Angels are going to be great for you. The cons, however, is while they get a lot of the normal toys that most of the Space Marines have, Dark Angels do miss out on some of the very specialized units, like the Centurions or the Vanguard Veterans, the Thunderfire Cannon, and even more sadly, the Interceptor aircraft. Although they do have their own versions of these things, the Dark Angels do miss out on some of this other stuff, so you may not want to go with them and may want to go with a regular Space Marine chapter if that's what you're after. Next up, we have the Death Watch. These are my absolute favorite faction of Space Marines, and for myself personally, probably in the game, although they're not necessarily the best race. If you like highly customizable elite units to go on special missions, then the Death Watch is the army for you. Now, the pros of the Death Watch is they are the special forces of the Space Marines, so they have the best gear and incredible versatility, lots of rerolls, and a focus on adaptability against your opponent. And their list is capable to be targeted to specific fights, and it can become very easy to take out the things that you focus on killing. However, as a con, the Death Watch is not a beginner army, and the expensive points cost to field the units makes a very low model count, which means you have a lot of the vulnerabilities that some of the more elite armies possess. If your opponent manages to take out some of your army nice and early in the game, you are going to struggle later on. Next up, we have the Grey Knights. Now, if you like psychic Space Marines that enjoy killing demons, then this is definitely the army for you. This is a race of psychic Space Marines. They get a lovely boost to both cast and deny spells, and they have lots of stratagems that help boost their psychic powers even more. And when they're not dishing out mortal wounds to the enemy with every single unit, every single turn, they get to teleport all over the board and destroy people. The cons, however, is they often find themselves having to burn earned command points in order to keep themselves from dying from the perils of the warp, which is something that can happen when you use psychic powers. And because they don't have many command points to use to get those rerolls, they find it very difficult to pull that off. Also, because they're an elite army, once again, you don't have many miniatures. Next up, we have the Space Wolves. Now, if you like powered armored space Vikings, then this is going to be the faction for you. This is a race of wolfmen with incredibly strong headquarters and strong troops units as well, which means you can take nice large detachments for command points boosts, and it's incredibly efficient to do this with Space Wolves versus many of the other armies in the Warhammer 40,000 world, especially with the Space Marines. However, as a disadvantage, they do have a lot of weaknesses with some of the things being missing from their units. For example, they don't really have gravitation weaponry unless they ally with other Space Marines, and they have no heavy weapons in their basic troops units like other Space Marines do, which means they have no answers to some of the more tactical or bigger vehicles in other armies without having dedicated units to deal with that, which does pose a weakness as your opponent can take out those dedicated squads, leaving you with no answer to deal with those bigger troops. Next up, we have the Adeptus Custodes. Now, if you like the color gold on elite, high-profile badasses, then this is going to be the faction for you. Now, as a pro, the Custodes shooting units are not vulnerable in assault, and their assault units are incredibly good at shooting. What that means is these guys are good at everything. The Custodes melee weapons usually come with the profile of a relic bolter as well, which means if they don't carry a gun, they've still got access to some kind of firepower no matter what. The cons are the fact that they don't really have any psychic powers, which makes them weak to the enemy psychics, and they do have a few ways to stop psychic powers, but they're really not that reliable. Plus, the Custodes are a very high points cost unit, which means once again, you don't have many models on the field, which does make it possible for your opponent to start taking your army apart and then make it very difficult for you to do anything about it. Next up, we have Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, if you like cyborgs and techno magic, then this is definitely the faction for you. Pros, they're an incredibly durable army with all of the headquarters able to repair themselves, and almost every unit has at least a 6-up feel no pain, which means they get to ignore wounds if they can roll a 6 or higher on a dice. However, as a con, most of the cool stuff that the army should be having is only released in Warhammer 30,000, which is an additional game that Games Workshop has, and that hasn't actually been released for Warhammer 40,000 yet. So we're still waiting on a lot of the really cool rules for some of their best units. And as the 30,000 miniatures are produced by Forge World, which is Games Workshop's sister company, and they're quite unpredictable about when they release things, there is no guarantee if or when we will get them. On top of that, they only have one named character, Belisarius Call, which means if you want to get all of the cool bonuses and buffs from special characters, then you're kind of limited to playing with them as Mars. Next up, we have the Sisters of Battle. If you like nuns with guns or badass women in futuristic space armor, then this is going to be the faction for you. Now, the Sisters of Battle make incredible allies, especially with their special character, Celestine, who's like a living angel with wings and a flaming sword, capable of moving and zipping all over the battlefield and killing things wherever she goes. The cons to the Sisters of Battle is that until they get their dedicated book sometime in 2019, they're really not yet a complete army. So sad. You're just going to be using them as allies for now. But they still have some really cool miniatures, and it can plug some holes in some of the other Imperial armies. Next up, we have the Imperial Knights, or Adeptus Titanicus. If you like giant robots that kick ass, then this is going to be the faction for you. Pros, these guys are insanely tough. Their average unit has 24 wounds and void shields to protect them against all kinds of shots coming into them that they can defend with their invulnerable save. Also, the Knights are really cool models that will almost always scare your opponent, especially if they're not ready to deal with an army of Imperial Knights coming towards them. The cons, however, is you are going to struggle holding objectives when you only have a couple of models. Whoever controls the objective is typically decided by the most amount of models around it, and having big, individual, powerful models with lots of wounds really doesn't cut it when you're trying to hold that objective. Next up, we have the Astra Militarum, or Imperial Guard. If you like 90s action movies where normal soldiers square up against impossible odds and yet somehow win in the end, then this is going to be the faction for you. The pros are that they're versatile and strong, with the ability to field countless hordes of bodies against your opponent's firepower. They have tanks and aircraft and so many vehicles and artillery to choose from that, with themes that range from Russia right through to World War I, British trench warfare and beyond, there is so much to choose and pick and customize when it comes to the Astra Militarum. The cons, however, is that your individual units are weak, and synergy is the key to winning with this army. And if somebody knows how to take apart your synergy, then you are in trouble. Next up, we have the Chaos Space Marines. Now, if you like metal music and evil space soldiers who sometimes will bring a guitar into battle, then this is the faction for you. The pros are that the Chaos Space Marines are very flexible in terms of army design, and you can pretty much build anything from a horde army to an elite demon force. You don't actually have to sacrifice your soul to play them either. A lot of people seem to think that the Chaos Space Marines are the bad guys, but there's a lot of arguments that maybe they're just the misunderstood, lovable good guys after all. The cons to the Chaos Space Marines, however, is that only a few of their units are competitive, so you're often going to be fielding the same thing over and over if you actually want to win. Their hordes and their big flying demons and a few support units are what tend to win the day, and they have little in the way of healing and repairing to survive drawn-out games. Next up, we have the Deathguard. Now, if you like disease-ridden, mutated, disgusting miniatures that are incredibly hard to kill, then this is going to be the faction for you. The pros are that despite being slow, they're actually quite mobile, as they can literally move and fire with heavy and assault weapons without penalty, making them pretty freaking fast when it comes down to it. They have plenty of rerolls as well, which makes them very reliable compared to other forces, in case you're somebody that typically gets bad dice rolls and you want to reroll those fails. The cons, however, is they have no long-range fire units outside of vehicles, and a lot of the Deathguard army requires close range, meaning that you have to actually cross the board before you're really effective. And despite being mobile, long distances isn't actually something that the Deathguard find very easy to do. Next up, you have the Thousand Sons. Now, if you like Egyptian-themed wizards with futuristic armor and guns, almost like Stargate but not, then this is going to be the faction for you. The pros are that there are 3 different types of magic to cast with the Thousand Sons, and almost every unit can cast spells. These guys dominate the psychic phase of the game, and they get boosted range to that too, making it even easier for them to crush with their mind powers. The cons, however, is that anti-psychic units really ruin their day, and due to hordes being used a lot nowadays in tournaments, their basic Space Marine troops are a little bit too expensive to be viable nowadays. Next up, we have the Chaos Demons. Now, if you've always wanted to command an army entirely composed of bizarre and horrifying monstrosities, then this is the faction for you. As a pro, they have an army-wide 5-up invulnerable save, so they don't really care about somebody trying to knock out their armor, as they're going to get that roll no matter what. And Tzeentch and Nurgle Chaos Demons make these guys even tougher to kill. Lots of demons have fly keywords, which means that they can leave close combat and still move around the board and secure objectives. However, as a con, they don't really have any shooting capabilities, so they have to get up close as fast as possible, which means your opponent has a lot of chance to ruin and weaken your army before you get into range. Next up, we have the Eldari. Now, if you like hoity-toity space elves, then this is going to be the faction for you. As a pros, they're fast, they're good at shooting, and they're good at psychic powers, and they can even bring lots of bodies to compete with hordes, and they're pretty good in close combat. In fact, it's hard to find a con. Okay, if we're gonna look at a con, then we're gonna talk about the fact that everything goes squish. Well, except for a wave serpent. You see, the Eldari are the glass cannon of the 40k universe. They hit hard, but they cannot take a hit. Next up, we have the Dakari. These are space pirate elves that keep slaves and torture people. And if that sounds like fun, then that's going to be the faction for you. Their pros are they have fast-moving units with lots of guns, and they're not too shabby in close combat either. They also share the Eldari keyword, meaning you can pick and choose the best units from the Eldari to build an epic megaforce. And finally, as a pro, almost every unit can fly. As a con, they have no natural psychic powers, so they do have to ally with Eldar in order to get that psychic power. And also, every unit can fly, which makes them incredibly weak to anyone who's got anti-flying weaponry. Next up, we have the Harlequins. If you like dancing actor space elves who know the secrets of the universe but refuse to share them, then this is going to be the faction for you. Pros. If the Eldari and the Dakari are fast, then these guys are light speed. They can run and charge into close combat and literally flip over all of the terrain on the board in the way. Plus, their models are gorgeous and very interesting to paint. Cons, it can be incredibly difficult to paint the models to make them look as good as you know you want them to be, and they're fragile in the game and cost a lot in terms of points to field, so you really need to know how to play with them to get the most out of them. Next up, we have the Necrons. If you like the movie Terminator and believe flesh beings are inferior, then this is going to be the faction for you. Pros, arguably they're the most durable army in the game, with units that can literally repair themselves and come back to life. And their basic guns are better than the Space Marines' basic guns. So the Necrons have a better gun. Cons, however, No anti-vehicle weapons in basic units, which means that everything in the army has to be specialized, so an opponent can shut down entire tactical capabilities from you with some serious selective shooting. Also, the Necrons have no real psychic powers, so they've got no ability to stop your opponent from casting psychic powers at you, which is a huge weakness in the army. Next up, we have the Orcs. Now, if you like brutal greenskins that love overwhelming people in close combat while laughing as they bash people's heads in, then this is going to be the faction for you. Pros, Wah! No, seriously, they have an ability called Wah! That makes it easy for them to cast almost any psychic power they want, and no one can do anything about it. Next up, they have huge numbers and are epic in close combat. They also have jump packs which let them zip all over the board. The Orcs are an epic force. As a con, however, they don't have a codex book yet, although it's very close to coming. But at the time of filming this video, they have 0 stratagems for cool in-game effects, although very soon. Also, the Orcs suck at shooting, like really badly, so an anti-horde army can nullify your entire army fast, and there's not much you can do about it. Next, we have the Tau. Do you like Japanese mechs? Do you want better guns than anyone else? If so, then this is the faction for you. Pros, the Tau have the best infantry guns in the game, with the longest range, and they have badass flying robots with insane amounts of firepower as well, and shield drones to protect them from enemy fire. Also, the entire army can shoot Overwatch at people charging into close combat, which is a really good thing, because as a con, the entire army sucks in close combat. Even the things that are good in close combat kinda suck. Also, for an army that should be good at shooting, they're really not the best shots. Next, we have the Tyrians. Now, if you like bug-like aliens with sharp talons and acid for blood, then this is going to be the faction for you. They are insanely customizable and incredible at everything from psychic powers to close combat and shooting. They're one of the most versatile armies in the game. The cons, however, are you need a lot of miniatures to be truly effective, which is financially one of the most challenging armies to play in the entire game. Also, the Tyrians get very few rerolls, which means a lot more random acts of chance for you to mess up compared with other armies. So if you're somebody that's bad and get bad luck with your dice rolls, then this may not be an army you want to play. And finally, we have the Gene Stealer cult. If you like construction workers that have switched to loving aliens through the power of lovable mind control, then this is going to be the faction for you. Pros, seriously though, these guys have it all. Because of the Tyranid keyword, they can not only use their own units, which have the ability to deploy anywhere on the board, but they can also use any Tyranid unit. They can also ally with some of the Astra Militarum Imperial Guard units too, giving them insane levels of customization from vehicles right through to giant monstrous creatures. Cons, they have limited unit choices within their own army unless they ally to something else. Also, they have no named characters at all, and currently there is still no official codex for this army. So at the time of filming this, they're very weak compared to the other armies, although they do make great allies for Tyranid. So I did say that at the end of this video, I would tell you who is the best race in the game. Now the truth is the game is pretty balanced, and armies come in and out of favor depending on what won the most recent tournaments. However, after playing this game for over 20 years, I can tell you that one army comes back time and time again as one of the most powerful races in the game. And that's the Eldari. Despite the pros and cons mentioned above, their unique play style of being a glass cannon makes them incredibly effective if you get the first turn of the game, meaning that the style of army in general just gives them an edge over others. And the fact that they have great range of movement means they can last even if they go second, darting all over the board, staying out of the range of their opponent, and dominating with hit and run tactics. So if you want an army that has stood the test of time, I would argue that the Eldari is it. And therefore you can probably argue that they are the best race in the game.